Ed and I are both double millennials. Susan's not quite there yet. Ed's been doing this since '82. I've been doing it since '80, and I think you entered it in '89. Is that correct?
99.
99, sorry. So we have a lot of experience here. Jim Dielson, is he in the crowd? Is Jim out there? Jim Dielson, who spoke yesterday on current energy, is a true pioneer. He's 84 years old, and he is still creating innovative solutions for the environment. So we're going to do this in sort of 3 parts. We have about 30 minutes. We're going to be around, so we're not going to have time for questions, but please do come and ask questions about wind energy.
It doesn't give you cancer?
No, wind doesn't give you cancer. That's a new one. I've heard a lot of other things, but not cancer. So I'm going to give you guys a quick summary of where the markets are, just for those of you who are like me, who sort of are visual learners. This is the growth of the wind energy since 1998. And you can see it has ups and downs. Back in 2013, when the production tax credit went away, so did the incentives, and therefore, low year. But as you can see, the last 5 years have been pretty steady. The interior, which we are part of Colorado, according to this metric, is part of the interior. So you can see we're up, this is at the end of 2018, close to 100 gigawatts. We're now, as of 2019, over 100 gigawatts, which used to be the American Wind Energy Association's long-term goal, and we've achieved it in 2020. This is where the U.S. ranks internationally. We put in about 7,500 megawatts last year, and you can see China is doing its part, although China's a much bigger energy budget. And we're second cumulatively. What's not on here is Denmark, where a lot of the wind got started, and actually is 40% of their energy. And that can show you here where the U.S. is. We're, I think, at about 6 to 8% of the U.S. energy. Electricity is from wind energy. You can see Denmark as a country is over 40%. And most of the countries, as you can see, are from Europe, who is pretty far ahead of us when it comes to really progressive policies for renewable energy. Okay, so this is where wind, all those dots are wind projects. And you can see, with the exception of the southeast, which has a pretty modest wind energy resource, it's all over the U.S. And you can see Colorado is out on the eastern plains. It's not in the mountains, and it's not in the west coast, not the west part of Colorado. It's where the wind resource is that can make it economically competitive with traditional energy forms. This is the rack-up of the states. Texas has been the leader for some number of years, although Ed hails from California. California, of course, got this whole thing started back in the Jerry Brown era in the late 70s. Jim Dielson was part of that scene, but Texas has surpassed that, and they're Iowa and now Oklahoma as far as cumulative. You can see Colorado down there in the top 10, both in annual installed capacity as well as cumulative capacity. This is a look at energy prices. Now, $40 a megawatt hour is like 4 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, this is of course, a sales price to the user, typically a utility for energy. You can see now in 2018, this is remarkable to me, and probably to Ed, who's been in it a long time, that we're down below 2 cents a kilowatt hour for long-term contracts. This is lower. This is actually lower cost. By the way, this is Jim Dielson. Is that Jim? Jim just walked in the room. That's the pioneer I was talking about. That's great new ideas. Jim, I just showed the picture of what was going on back when you started all this, back in the late 70s. So in any case, this is competitive with burning natural gas. And it's way competitive with burning coal. So we are now on par or better than burning fossil fuels. So it's an economic play. Used to be an environmental play, it's now an economic play. It has huge environmental consequences, huge economic development impacts, but it's an economic play. So that big blue swath there is the projection of where natural gas prices may go. You can see there's a lot of uncertainty there. And then you can see where the median PPA prices for wind, because when you sign a contract for wind, it's for 20 years. So you can guarantee what that price is going to be 20 years from now. You can't do that with natural gas or fossil fuels that have a fuel cost escalation factor. This is the percentage of energy coming from renewables according to renewable portfolio standards, a major driver for wind energy when states passed renewable energy standards. And you can see Colorado was one of the pioneers where they brought it to the public because they couldn't get the utility at that time to agree to, or the legislature to agree to portfolio standards, so the people actually voted it in. That was a pioneering effort here in Colorado. But you can see out in California, which is a huge energy market, 60% coming from renewables by 2030. That's an enormous amount of renewable energy. And California, of course, drives a lot of the Western energy development. So this is the projection for wind energy over the next, looks like to 2028. We're talking anywhere, obviously the next 2 years are going to be boom years because of the production tax credit expiring, even though all the fossil incentives remains the same because they're in the tax code. It's going to be 6 gigawatts a year. That's over $6 billion a year of investment in wind energy. So we're going to get through this production tax credit change and still do, I think, fairly well. Okay, I'm going to come back to this. Okay, so Ed, I'm going to ask you a few questions on a national level. I'm going to go to Susan, who's been working in Colorado in a whole variety of different jobs related to renewable energy. Very fascinating background. But I'm going to ask Ed. Ed's been around a while, as I mentioned. He was actually the president of the American Wind Energy Association board, as well as being one of the leading deal makers in America on renewable energy, and does both wind and solar. So Ed, tell the audience here what are the drivers for wind energy, both 10 years ago, currently, and out into the future.
Sure. Thank you, Larry. And first, I want to say it has been a privilege to spend my entire 36 years as a lawyer in the renewable energy space. I think folks were crazy when I told folks that's what I was going to do when I came out of law school. But
I was going to mention you were a lawyer.
We stayed with it and worked for guys like Jim Dielson, and it's been a great way to make a career and really make a difference. I think over my time in the industry. We're seeing a number of changes. Certainly, the decision was made a few years ago to wean ourselves off of the federal subsidies that have supported wind for the entirety of my career, certainly, and now to try to compete without subsidies against natural gas that has substantial subsidies. So we are seeing a push in the next couple of years as these subsidies start to burn off. I guess the good news is that even as the subsidies burn off, we are seeing a lot of activity in the wind industry, and the developers and the financiers. The money coming into the space is greater than it's ever been. And I think we're seeing beyond 2020 into 2021, 2022, 2023, we're still seeing a lot of investment in the space and people believing that the technology has improved to the point that it's still a good bet, even without government subsidies. So that's a real positive, I think, and it's something that really we weren't sure of a couple of years ago. Another big change is that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, all the power was sold to public utilities. And so we were really at the mercy of whether or not the public utilities, who have their own incentives, their own shareholders to deal with, wanted to buy renewable power versus burning more coal or investing in natural gas plants. They were incented to buy renewables in a large part by requirements, state requirements. 26 states have renewable portfolio standards, as you showed many of them on the slide earlier. In the last couple of years, and this year in particular, over 50% of the offtake from wind projects is being supported through corporate power purchase contracts. So companies like Google, I was on a panel with the power purchaser for Google a couple of months ago, and she mentioned that in 2017 they had procured their entire needs for power from green energy at 8.7 terawatt hours. In 2018 it was up to 10 terawatt hours, and they continue to grow. So a lot of the companies whose consumers are the millennials that were talked about earlier are concerned about making sure that they appear green. But even other companies, I've been working with McDonald's. They have 14,000 restaurants in the US, and they want to change their golden arches to green arches, and what can they do to buy renewable power. So there's a lot of consumer pressures. It's good to see that rather than relying upon the public utilities to do the right thing, that the consumers are really driving decisions to expand this industry. And although there's a lot of pressure, obviously, from the natural gas industry, we're not yet dispatchable. Batteries will help that. We're not invisible. There are areas, you talked about being off the coast of Massachusetts. Wind turbines in the water is a very important thing to expand this industry, to help the planet. But you know, they are going to be visible. And how far out do you put them? How do you install them without disrupting sea life? So we have some challenges, but I think that you know, we continue to kind of have the greater good at heart, and I think that we'll continue to grow.
And we mentioned that wind energy now is actually cheaper than burning coal, and that driver from an economic standpoint with utilities who have a lot of coal plants are now announcing shutting down of their older coal plants. Is that a significant driver as well for demand?
We've been waiting for the utilities to get on the bandwagon and start investing in wind energy for a long time. And that's something I think if you look at the last 2 or 3 years, something we are finally starting to see. It's becoming more and more expensive to operate coal plants. There are certainly political pressures to keep moving coal into the system, but coal is now 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour to produce power. Those plants just can't survive for another 10 or 15 years, and they are being shut down. They have to be replaced with something. The question is, do you replace them with your utility with natural gas, or do you use renewables? We're seeing more and more utilities replace them with renewables, provided that they can get the state Public Utilities Commission to allow them to rate base the equipment. And many of them are. There are some accounting issues they've been working through. We've had some real progress in the last 9 months on that front. But we are seeing companies like Ameren and NiSource and others that have been traditional coal utilities investing heavily in wind. We just did a 1,000 megawatt deal for a couple of the utilities in the upper Midwest. So we're seeing that type of investment.
And you know, the models, the climate models are saying that the West is going to get hotter and drier. The East might get hotter and wetter. And we already have a limited water supply here in the West. Putting in new gas plants, of course, consumes water for cooling. That's something that isn't talked about too much. Wind uses no water, and so there's an enormous water play as well with wind development.
Well, let me interrupt you. One of the great problems we have in the wind industry is we've done a good job in certain areas. We've done a very poor job of helping, in fact, maybe we've done a poor job as the environmental community in explaining to America that natural gas is not as clean as it looks. Just because you don't see soot coming off of your gas-fired stove doesn't mean that it's not having an impact. And the leaking methane from the pipes is a whole other area that seems to be being ignored. And until we can, if we're not going to price carbon, at least let's face the fact that burning natural gas does have an impact. And the carbon impact of natural gas is something that I think a lot of our consumers don't yet understand.
We had a study done in 2006 at NREL and with the industry and with the American Energy Association that looked at what was the potential of making 20% of electricity from wind. We're now between 6 and 8% by 2030. And it was highly questionable they could actually do that technically and economically. And we showed through this analysis that we could do that. And back then, 2006, that 20% electricity by 2030 looked like about 330 gigawatts. We're now, the 6 to 8 region. Is 20% by 2030 still a viable, not just goal, but attainable goal?
It's attainable if two things happen. Again, I guess it's very attainable if we would tax carbon, but assuming that that will be difficult to cause to occur in the next several years. Wind competing on its own needs transmission for land-based wind, and it needs to expand off the eastern seaboard. If we can expand some of the projections for what should happen in the late 2027, 2028, 2029, if some of those projects go in, we'll get close to 20%. It depends on how much opposition there will be to those offshore projects. And it depends on whether or not we can change some of the federal regulations to allow for a transmission to move the power. And the wind is obviously usually installed where people don't live. It's windy land, people don't want to live there. And getting that power to load centers continues to be a challenge. But those are kind of the two big nuts we have to crack to hit 20% by 2030.
Well, in wind energy, we always talk about the three big benefits: the economic benefit, the environmental benefit, and the fact that it's indigenous to the U.S., the energy security benefit. Are they adequately taken into account in financial analyses?
Well, I mean, I don't think they are. I mean, certainly what we've tried to do is we've tried to push, since 1992, we've tried to push this federal production tax credit that tries to incorporate all those concepts and then gives wind a competitive edge, or an edge opposite a dispatchable resource that doesn't pay a carbon tax like natural gas. I think as we start to see that tax credit go away, unless there's an effort to renew it, we probably aren't actually paying enough attention to the benefits that wind is providing. Or the jobs. One of the things that has pushed wind certainly is that the job creation that both wind and solar have created. I think the solar industry claims to have 1 out of every 7 jobs created since the recession is in solar. So the jobs impact is something I think the solar industry probably does a better job than the wind industry of promoting. But wind, the jobs directly in wind, folks that are up tower twisting bolts or installing wind turbines, they are significantly greater than the number of folks mining coal.
There's about 115,000 direct jobs associated with wind today, and if you do the real economic analysis, there's indirect jobs and there's induced jobs, so you can actually double or triple that figure as far as the impact of jobs. That's one of the ironic things about this administration talking about coal jobs and how we need to get coal jobs back in place, whereas renewables, the job factor per megawatt hour is an order of magnitude greater. I'm going to turn to Susan, and I'm going to come back to you, Ed, at the end. Susan, I've known Susan quite a long time. I knew her when she was with what they call the Law Fund, Land and Water Fund of the Rockies, doing some pioneering work with Rod Meyer on the wind source program here with Excel. Then she was with the Colorado Energy Office, as well as with Vestas, a big manufacturer of wind turbines. And now she's with Invenergy. I'm sorry, she was also with the Colorado Energy Office for a while, and now she's with Invenergy. So she's seen it from all sides, from the advocacy side, from the manufacturing side, from the utility use side, from the development side, and from the public policy side. So she's seen all viewpoints. I want to ask Susan, as we focus on Colorado, how do you see Colorado today, wind-wise, versus what you sort of dealt with 20 years ago?
Yeah, we've come a long way. It's been very exciting to spend the last 20 years working in the renewable energy field. I hope to get to, what are you at 35, 36 years? I hope to get there. We still got some more work to do. But thinking back to the late 1990s, it's interesting, Ed's commenting that some of the demand for wind power now is corporate purchasing, because that's how wind got its start back in the late 90s. Environmental advocates were encouraging electric utilities to think more holistically about energy efficiency resources, renewable energy resources, and back then, wind was a lot more expensive. And the utilities were reluctant to make big purchases of wind energy because it would drive up rates for their customers. And the advocates at Land and Water Fund of the Rockies and others across the state went to the Public Utilities Commission hand in hand with the utilities and said, hey, what if you charge people a little bit more? If this costs a little bit more, I think we probably have some customers that would be willing to pay for it. The same way many of us go to the store and might buy organic milk or organic almond milk instead of the regular stuff, we're willing to vote with our dollars. So Xcel Energy and some of the other utilities across the country started to develop green power programs. And if you wanted renewable energy, you could sign up and they'd charge you a little bit on your bill. And that's how the first 3 wind projects in Colorado got built back in 98 and 99. Some of the first wind farms in Wyoming as well were built to serve that customer demand. And the advocates went out and led grassroots marketing programs to let consumers know that they had that option to vote with their dollars. And we talked about the energy resource decisions shifting from the boardroom to the living room. Because up until that point, you didn't have a choice in who your electric provider was, and you didn't have a choice in what kind of fuel they were using to generate the electricity to serve you as a customer. So it was really a big sea change in how the energy business worked, and led to a really good start for the wind industry here in the state. And since then, we've seen huge improvements in technology. One of those wind farms that was built back in '98 in Wyoming is being repowered. And 61 turbines that each produce 600 kilowatt hours are going to be replaced with 13 modern wind turbines that each produce 3 megawatts. So in that 20-year span, the technology has improved to have 5-fold the energy production from each machine. We've also seen, Larry mentioned Vestas invested in manufacturing facilities here in Colorado. They opened 4 manufacturing facilities almost 10 years ago. And those employ not just Coloradans at work in the factories, but up and down the supply chain. And their suppliers and manufacturers have come to Colorado and neighboring states to produce many of the components they use in the system. And that's actually made Colorado number 3 in the nation for wind manufacturing jobs. We're number 8 for the amount of installed wind energy on our system, but number 3 for the number of manufacturing jobs. So it's been a huge, huge growth in the industry, massive technology improvements. The costs have come down because of that U.S. manufacturing and those technology improvements. And the last wind project built in Colorado was built because it was a cost-effective investment for Xcel Energy to make. I was lucky enough to work on that while I was working at Xcel Energy. 600 megawatt project out by Lyman, made with Colorado manufactured wind turbines. And it's something we never would have thought about back in 1999.
So we have 3,700 megawatts now in Colorado. There's another 1,000 in development. It'll bring us close to 5,000 megawatts, $5 billion of investment, mostly on the Eastern Plains, where the wind, how's that song go? Wind comes rolling down the plains. But you know, NREL has a resource map that says we have 50,000 megawatts of 40% capacity factor available. We're never going to get to that, but what has to happen to really have Colorado be a real robust resource for the entire West?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Colorado's a little bit landlocked, so we don't have the luxury of being able to export power to too many places. The western grid ends at the eastern border of Colorado, and the Midwest grid starts, and they don't talk to each other very well, so it's a little bit tough to export power out of the state. We'd have a really hard time getting over to California, the big market. So I think many of the utilities in the state are looking to continue to add renewables to their portfolios. We've seen a lot of announcements with big carbon reduction goals. Even Tri-State Generation and Transmission, who actually still owns coal mines, is going to be working with Governor Ritter's Colorado State University Center for New Energy Economy to come up with a plan to try to take into some of that public input and consideration on the demand for renewable energy and energy efficiency. So I think we have a lot of opportunity left in Colorado, and I think we'll see the industry continue to grow here.
So you work in communities. You did that both at Excel as well as now with Invenergy. What's the attitude out there in rural Colorado where these wind turbines are being sited?
I think generally it's positive. The economic development benefits from projects like these, we work with a lot of cattle ranchers and farmers whose children are not interested in continuing the family business. So the families who are interested to supplement their income by leasing some land for wind development can stay on their ranches and farms a little bit longer than they might have otherwise. So many individuals that we work with as landowners in our projects are excited about that personal economic potential. And then property tax revenues that support rural schools, that's a big benefit to the communities. A lot of that tax money goes to provide other goods and services in the community. And we provide some good long-paying jobs. The guys up tower with a wrench, guys and gals up tower with a wrench that Ed mentioned, those are great high-wage paying jobs that help keep people in rural areas.
Keep the young people, because Ed and I don't climb towers anymore. So the young people stay in the community, and the young people, that's one of the biggest concerns in rural America is losing the youth. The average age of farmers, I think, in Colorado is over 65 years old. So it's keeping young people in the community with these good-paying jobs. I want to have one final question for each of you, then I'm going to switch gears. Ed, what do you see over the next decade as far as U.S. wind development? What are the big challenges to get over?
I'm very bullish on the industry. I think that we have to replace several 100,000 megawatts of coal plants, and we have to make a choice of whether that's going to be renewables or whether it's going to be natural gas. And I think that as we work with battery technology, we can make this product more dispatchable. And the cost certainly has come down and continues to come down. The reliability is much better than it's ever been. And I think that we will come close to our 20% goal. And I think we have not just the technology to support it, but we have, I think, a growing consumer base that expects the power we produce to come from green electrons, not brown electrons.
And Susan, next decade in Colorado.
Same. I think I'm also very bullish. I think we've got a lot of technology improvements that make this a good fit. One thing we didn't talk about is how Xcel Energy has been using weather forecasting to better integrate wind into their system. They know when it's going to be windy. They know it's not going to be windy everywhere all at the same time. But they've worked with meteorologists at NCAR in Boulder to be able to predict and better integrate the wind energy in their system. And the addition of battery technologies as they continue to evolve, I don't see any problems getting pretty high penetration rates of wind here in Colorado in the next decade.
Can I go do one more slide here? Let's wrap up. Can I push the slides?
It's working.
So I just want to, we have 1 minute left, and I just wanted to let you guys know, we have a lot of communication today about the next generation. I just want you to know that we, the wind industry, is working actively to educate the next generation in wind and solar energy. We train about 1,000 teachers a year and impact some 30,000 students a year, K through 12, all the way through the universities. Working with 12 universities around the country to teach wind and solar energy at the university level, taking those seniors out to rural communities, evaluating those rural communities for wind or solar at the school, and then teaching the teacher how to teach wind and solar, and then we have a Kid Wind program to do competitions. We put up 145 wind turbines, primarily funded by fines, air and water quality fines by EPA, environmental fines. So we're out there actively doing that. We're privatizing the program that started with DOE back in 2006, and they've gotten out of it. That's my major retirement project, is to privatize those projects. So if you guys, any of you are interested in that segment of educating the next generation of advocates and wind and solar workers, we'd love to have you participate. Thank you very much.